I mean, I think generally speaking, for someone like you and the way that you've gardened, I think crop rotation makes a lot of sense, right? You're growing about the same amount of things. So the same types of vegetables, the same quantity of vegetables. There's some vegetables that I know will sit out 1 year, for example, for you. While there's some spaces that are a little bit small, I know you have like some 3 by 6 beds. Your spaces are about the same size. I think it's easier for you to rotate your crops. And we talked about this a couple of episodes ago as it relates to that doesn't give me like an excuse to say, well, my structure, it's way different. My garden layout is way different. And so in turn, I'm not rotating crops. I'm still living in the world of I get to decide tomorrow how many tomato plants I'm going to actually plant out. Right.
Yeah.
I want to be able to switch things up at the very last minute. Right. Does that add stress to my garden experience? Sure does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I enjoy some of the freedom around also that? Yep. Yeah, so two things to be true at the same time. But I do want to get back to like as an example, what you listed, like lettuce, I think radishes, those are spot on for things that I feel like aren't problematic from a disease or pest perspective for me in my space. Spinach is another example. And those are also crops that I've not read that are like combative in a lot of places. And so in turn, I kind of feel like those are freebies, right?
Yeah.
So if I want to put them in the same spot for whatever reason, I can. And that also kind of lightens the load of that spot is a spot where I could put any of these simple crops. And then I can focus my energy on a few other spaces only for those kind of rotating crops, right?
But you know what's interesting as we sit here and talk about it, the most difficult time I have with it is with nightshades because it's
Mhm.
such a broad category of plants, you know. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's peppers, eggplants, tomatoes, potatoes, like all of those kind of fall into that
Yeah.
category. And so it's really difficult. And I think, you know, as we sit here and we do it, I've got this bed that's empty right now. It's just got stuff. I direct sowed some seeds on the trellis. I may actually go in there and break my rule and say, hey, I've got a bunch of extra pepper plants. I really want to grow extra peppers this year. So let me throw them because I already know, anyways, that there's not going to be any nightshade there next year already, you know, because that was the whole thing with the groupings that we had talked about in the previous
Mhm.
episode is to help facilitate more easily the crop rotation. So it's the guesswork's kind of taken out of it. Now there's going to be a hiccup here and there, and I think it's important to note that there's always going to be a hiccup in your garden, and you're always going to have to make an adjustment to some extent or a sacrifice. You know, I feel like everything is a compromise. You ever feel that? Like it's never going to be perfect. You're always going to have to compromise something, and you need to be comfortable with that.
Absolutely. I was actually chatting with another gardener in the comments about one of the joys of the garden for me is that it doesn't need to be perfect.
Yeah.
My garden doesn't need to be perfect, right? No matter how nicely I have things stacked up against this and stacked up against this fence and how much I sweep my, backyard garden patio where, if there's not a bed, there's dirt to be swept up. No matter how much effort I put into that, the act of gardening doesn't need to be perfect, and there's joy in that for me. There's
Yeah.
satisfaction in when I win in the garden, and then there's also a level of, like, forgiveness when it comes to if I have a misstep, if there's some fail. I do wanna just make one clarifying point before we move on, which I know we need to move on, is I keep saying, like, it's not problematic from a pest or a, disease perspective. That's not the only benefit when it comes to crop rotation, right? A lot of it has to do with the nutrients that are coming out of the soil from growing a particular crop. And the next set of vegetables you may put into that bed, that space. The idea is for it to be more complementary to whatever was just pulled out. So I do want to clarify that. And of course, there's always the act of amending your soil to help compensate for some of that as well.
Yeah. Are you talking about the crop rotation bit?
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it like this: it's all good until it's not good, and then
Hmm.
when it's not good, it's like terrible. So just kind of is what it is. But So keep in mind your crop rotation because that will also help guide you if you choose to do so. And if not, then don't worry about it. But the other thing